Yes. Oh my gosh.
What is it, Eric?
It's the railroad watch.
So who does it belong to?
Me now, I guess.
That's true. That's a very honest answer.
Turn it around and look at the other engraving.
Who did it belong to at one time?
Oh, right here. Oh, that's really cool.
What does it say on it?
George Leslie. Wait.
That's my great-grandfather. That's my grandfather. Your great-grandfather.
No, his great-great-grandfather.
Three grandfathers ago. When was he born, Charlie, then? In the 18-something?
It's on there.
Yeah.
What does it say on there?
What?
Read what it says.
1870.
So he was born 1870.
Yeah.
So it would have been 2 generations ago, right?
3, because...
You're the third.
I'm his grandfather. Dave was his great-grandfather. And
no, Daddy, I'm sorry. He was my great-grandfather. He's
great.
Right, great. That's exactly right. Great.
Yeah.
No.
And then
Henry had the watch, and then he gave it to Dad.
Henry Abel Rollyson.
That's my grandfather.
1895.
And that's the watch he was using when he retired from the railroad.
Can you imagine and this man wore this watch or carried
all the way back then.
I mean, he wore it on a daily basis, didn't he? It's like I'm wearing my watch.
Oh, you better believe it said
that was his watch.
When a dad, especially on the railroad, a watch is a very important tool. I mean,
you had to have one.
You had no correspondence between
that's right.
other trains running or the
that's
conductor of the caboose or anything.
Otherwise, it would
everything
crash.
was by hand signal. So, and if you had like a meat order on a train, you had to get in a siding and maybe have a meat order, and that means you'd wait there till a certain time, and then you could go out, because if that other train hadn't been there, he had gotten aside. Or you might have a wait order, and the passenger train was on a schedule. You had to wait there till he goes by.
It's called a meat order.
Meat, M-E-E-T.
Or a wait
like
order.
you meet someone.
Yeah. And when you went to work, everybody compared their watches.
Oh,
to the second.
Time.
Not, I got about
Oh,
5.
right, yeah.
To the second. And every 30 days you had to take it to a railroad watch jeweler and have it checked for how much. If it lost 2 or 3 seconds, he kept it and adjusted it and give you a loaner to use. And you had to have it checked every.
Where did most of the watches come from? Where were they made back then? In the U.S.?
Switzerland.
Well,
or they were still
they made them everywhere. This is in Illinois, Santa Fe Special, and they made Elgins. They had Bullivas. They had Gruens. They had Cleveland Ball. I had Cleveland Ball. They had a lot of different.
They wouldn't
brands.
import. I mean, think of it, have to come by boat from Europe. I mean, that wouldn't be feasible, I wouldn't think. So read the label. I can't see it from here. Can you read it?
Which one?
On both sides. Right, there's one. On
the Railroad Watch, Illinois Santa Fe Special, Simmons chain.
But everyone on the train crew had.
Okay, now wait. Before you read the rest, let's have Papa tell us a story about the Simmons chain.
But the Simmons chain is what story about the train?
The trading.
Huh?
The trading of the chains.
Oh, yeah. Well, now that Simmons chain is a gold chain.
This chain, the chain on
it? Yeah. And most railroaders had a Simmons chain on the watch, a gold chain. Well, I was down at pawnbrokers in Charleston, and man, they had some beautiful chains there. And I bought me a chain, and it glistened.
When was this?
This was when I worked on the railroad.
Oh, way back in the 40s then.
You know, when we'd be sitting around in sidings waiting for another train to come or something, you'd trade knives and trade this and trade, sometimes even trade watches or, well, Harry Shomos, he seen that chain, had my overalls and that chain running across just shining. He said,
Shine.
Where'd you get that chain? I said, man, I bought it. Where do you think I got it? He said, how you trade? And I said, well, I'm not trading this. I said, I wanted this. That's why I bought it. And he said, well, I've got a Simmons chain here. I'll trade you for it. And I said, no, Harry. I said, this is the chain I want. And he still wanted the chain. I said, I'll tell you what. You give me $5 and I'll trade you chain.
$5.
He give me $5 and that Simmons chain for that one that I had. It probably wasn't worth the fraction of what that Simmons chain was worth.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, how would they chain that up to their coat?
Well,
let's see how that works. Very cool the way it's helped him to get off the hook there.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, that's right. Around in there.
of course, we had overalls.
Right.
The bib overalls, and I never could get Eric to wear them. Except he did.
He did wear them at Cass.
Cass, I remember.
Yeah.
That. You looked so cute in it.
We carried it, you know, they had 2 pockets down here for pens and pay, and then a side pocket that your watch goes in, and then your overall over here had it. That goes in the buttonhole.
Right.
And then you got that there, and you want to check your time, you pull your watch out.
So you always had,
every pair of pants you bought, dress pants or work pants, had a watch pocket in it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see watch pockets in pants anymore. But used to be every pair of pants you bought had a watch pocket, and then you wore it here. And
only for the males, though, right? Not women.
Well, yeah,
Women
didn't even wear too many pants.
So what did women do, actually? I don't even know. How did they carry their watches back then? When the men had those, what did women have equivalent?
Well, they had wristwatch or...
so there were wristwatches back then. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, matter of fact, I got rid of my watch when I got off the railroad. I couldn't wait to get a wristwatch because I couldn't have a wristwatch when I had to have this.
What was the reason?
Why? I just told you.
Because of the pockets? Why not have a wristwatch? Because of the...
A railroad watch is very different than a wristwatch.
A wristwatch would keep time.
That's what it was then.
And time
was this of essence.
Now, do you remember how I showed you how to set it? Of course, you're not going to be using it for a timepiece.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
No.
Maybe.
Well, I'll show you one more time, but don't do this just to show somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Don't let anyone do it. But to change the time, see it's not running now. You hold a watch and you turn that. It's not just a snap-on face like most watches are.
You have to unscrew it like that?
Screws off. Very fine threads. And the back, the only one that'll ever remove it would be a jeweler. The back comes off the same way, but don't ever take it off. The jeweler's the only one that removes that back.
Oh, he won't do that, really. And it's still holding time 150 years later, huh? When you think about it, Eric.
Yeah.
See, that lifts off. And then, so you don't actually, the reason for that is so that you don't accidentally change the time on it. Then you got a little lever here that you pull up. And then, let's see, I've got 2. I've got a quarter after 8.
Yeah.
So you turn that, just at it. You set it a quarter after 8. Push that back in. And you wind it up and hopefully
That has to be wound, Eric, for it to work.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we had to do is remember to wind our watch.
Because now you don't have to do that anymore.
But our watch was a very important tool, so we never forgot to wind it.
How often would you have to wind it?
Every day.
Every day.
Just once a day?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because my mom still has a watch that she does that with. I mean, no modern
So
watch.
there you are, it's running.
Wow.
I'm not going to wind it very much because you're not going to be using it for a time.
So you have all the names of the people that take care of this, right, Eric?
Yeah.
So great grandpa Waite owned it first, but he didn't use it as a railroad. But he didn't use it as a railroad watch, did he, Daddy?
No, he wasn't on the railroad.
So you heard that, Eric, right?
Yeah. So it hasn't always been a railroad watch.
Well, it's always been a railroad watch because that's what it's called.
But
Now, see, they made other railroad watches, but they were a different size. This is a size 16. They made a size 18, but they become illegal on the railroad because they were too big. They were a bigger watch than this. And this was the standard size for the railroad watch. But a railroad watch was well, you couldn't work on a train crew if you didn't have a railroad watch. It was a...
But the train company never supplied them. I mean, it was always something that they would have to... And if they couldn't afford to buy one, then, of course, it's...
Well, if you get a job, you can afford to buy it. You can buy it on credit.
Now, how much would that have cost in 1870?
Oh, when Grandpa Wade bought it?
No, but when I was working on the railroad, this watch would have cost you right at $100.
Back in 19...
That was in the 1950s, early 50s.
Really?
And
that was a lot of money.
That's just for the watch, not the chain.
and the reason I know,
300%.
I never bought one new. I bought one off somebody when I went in. I've traded 2 or 3. I've had a Cleveland Ball and Elgin,
And you sold all those?
well, I swapped them. I sold mine and I had a Cleveland Ball when I got off, and I sold it because I wanted a wristwatch. I started wearing it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
But this is the heirloom, and you actually use this on the railroad, though, at times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there it is. Your watch.
Oh, what a neat present to get, Eric, huh?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
That's what, family's all about. You almost can feel connected, huh? Now, do you have any pictures at all of these old guys? No.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have pictures of
Yeah, I got
Grandpa
pictures.
Wade.
Well,
Is that
yeah,
what you mean?
but the one from 1870, you would
Yeah.
have. You do?
Sure, I have moving pictures that I have on video.
Now, what railway company did he work for?
B&O, Baltimore and High.
Grandpa Rollyson. Grandpa
and
Wade.
that stood for what?
Baltimore and High.
Baltimore, Ohio.
Yeah. Now here's I don't know what this is. Oh. This guy called me on the phone and asked me, he was going to write a book about the railroad, and I don't know if he ever read it. If he did, I never found out. But he asked me a bunch of questions, so this just tells you about when I was starting on the railroad.
How many years did you work there?
Let's see, 4 years.
Eric, do me a favor, read that out loud.
All of it?
Yeah.
Read it out loud.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That'd be interesting to all of you.
Whoa.
I was in service, Air Force.
See that?
This is
tell you what it
him
is.
being
He
interviewed.
called me on the phone, and he was interviewing me, and this is what I told him because he was wanting to interview people working on the railroad about
Okay.
So I was in service from 1946 to 1949, and after I was discharged, I hired out on the railroad as gasaway as a fireman in June of 1949. Related former B&O fireman Charles R. Rollyson of Charleston, West Virginia. My dad was an engineer at Gasaway. His name was Henry Abel Rollyson, but everybody called him Abe. He hired out sometime after the B&O took over the coal and coke railway, and he retired from the railroad at Gasaway. My uncle, Hugh Rollyson, was also an engineer at Gasaway, and my dad's first cousin, Austin Rollyson, was a caller at Gasaway. I hired out as a fireman in June of 1949 and got a leave of absence and went to college over at Glenville for a year, and then I came back to the railroad and worked as a fireman until 1952. When the diesel started coming, I was furloughed a lot, so I came down and hired on at Carbide, Union Carbide, and I later retired from there. When you hired out as a fireman, you had to make 3 student trips. I made them all out of Gasaway. I made my first student trip on the helper on an eastbound train to Grafton over to Adrian and back. One on a turn to Grafton and another on a turn to Charleston. Me and a friend of mine, Paul James, graduated from high school and went in the service together. We got discharged together, and then we hired out of the railroad together. What exactly is hired out or hired?
Means we got a job.
Okay.
See, I got a job. Dad got me a job when I come out of service, and Bus said, "Oh,
Bus
see
is
if your
James.
Dad can get me a job too." So I asked Dad, and Dad got him a job too. So we both hired out as firemen. See, we went to college together, joined the service together, went through the service together, come out and worked on the railroad together.
Wow.
And that's one of the guys that was at his reunion that I've met.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Call you go back a long time, huh?
Whole
life.
As a matter of fact, when we hired out, we were going to make our first student trips as firemen, and Paul went out on the first helper engine, and I went out on the second helper engine, so for the rest of our time, he had seniority on me because he was on the first helper engine that left the yard at Gasaway.
Now let me explain to you about seniority. Seniority, see, you had jobs on the railroad that you bid on. Like if a turn come open, it was advertised, and the man with the most seniority that bid on it got that job. So for the rest of our life on the railroad, Bus could...
Who Daddy got the job for.
That I got the job. He could, because he went out, we went out at the same time on the same train. But he was, and we were on helpers, the rear of the train. He went out on the third engine, and I was on the fourth engine. But he had seniority over me for the rest of our lives because his seniority started they had to have somebody do it, where we both went out on the same day.
Right.
And he was on the first engine, so he had seniority the rest of his life.
Very cool.
Yeah. Let's see. They had to have some way to break. They had to have some way to break us. So the firemen who went out of the first engine got the seniority, even though we went out on the same train and were called at the same time.
But seniority was very important on the railroad.
After we shoved the eastbound train up the mountain to Adrian, we cut off, turned the engines around on a Y, and the helper, what's a Y? W-Y-E?
That's where we'd come over to Adrian, and then
like the Y in the road?
The head engines would take them on to Grafton. Okay, we stopped there. We got in a siding there, and then we'd have a snack or something, and then we'd go back. The Y was back here. We'd back down. See, we're headed that direction, but we're going to come back to Gasaway where we come out of. So they had a Y built like that. We'd back the engines up in there, brake would get off and throw the switch. We'd come out of the Y this way and back, hit it back into Gasaway.
Okay. That makes sense, actually.
Yeah. Around on a Y, and the helpers came back to Gasaway while the head engines went on to Grafton with the train. They used those CA engines when I worked out of Gasaway. The most engines I ever saw leave Gasaway on one of those trains from Grafton were 5 steam engines, and they were all those 2700s and 2800s.
Yeah, that's a CA, 2700, 2800 class.
All the black smoke, right? Huge amount of black smoke.
White, a lot of times white smoke, wasn't it?
Well,
pretty black.
Ideally it was, if you was like over in Grafton where the road foreman of engines and that was at, and you had black smoke, you might get questioned about it because the black smoke, you're putting too much coal in, or sometimes if you get an engine that's not steaming too good, you have to make black smoke.
Yeah.
But if you just get puffs of white smoke coming up, and your fire's level and hot, and then you get more heat and everything.
That's the beauty of it.
Well, you always seen the black smoke, when you look at movies and things. Yeah.
Well, they do that for movies, I think.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Most of these CA engines had stokers, but I've had to hand fire other engines. What they call the Buckhannon local operated between Gasaway and Buckhannon.
Yeah.
Buckhannon, and it usually ran with a shovel-fired engine, and then of course the yard engine at Gasaway was a shovel-fired engine. I never fired a passenger train, but the engine on the Charleston-Grafton passenger train was usually a shovel-fired engine.
Shovel-fired too.
That's what they call them?
When you shovel the coal?
Yeah,
shovel
makes
coal.
sense, right.
The other's a stoker, and they have standard stokers and Lowry stokers. The CAs had Lowry stoker on it. The bigger engines had what they called no, they had the standard. The Lowry stoker was on the bigger. One of them works by just like a screw. Goes back to the coal car and just screws that up, and you got a plate there with fingers on it that distributes the coal out over the fire. But now the Lowry, it has a feed on both sides of the firebox, and it is a back and forth thing, like instead of a solid screw. It just brings them in like that.
Oh, okay.
Distributes them.
Makes sense.
When I hired out in 1949, the Gasaway shop was going full blast. They had a big shop crew over there, and they did all the work on the engines right there. The yard at Gasaway was an active yard because everything was coming through. That yard turn also went up the branch to Sutton. That was a real slow-moving train going up there because that track had a light rail on it, and they had a 5-mile-per-hour speed limit on it. They did a lot of work on that track when they built the Sutton Dam in the late 1960s because they had to haul a lot of stone up there to build that dam.
Yeah, we hauled a lot of stuff Sutton, but it was a thin rail track, and just you went like that, and 5 mile an hour is the speed limit.
It must have
That's
taken
crazy.
forever.
They didn't use a yard engine for hauling that stone. They had a regular turn assigned. We didn't work that Sutton branch every day when I was working. Ordinarily, it was just a couple of times a week. It also made my first paid trip on a helper from Gasaway to Adrian and back. I worked some from Gasaway to Grafton and from Gasaway to Charleston. I also worked on the extra board at Cowan for a while, but I never worked out of Cowan that much. And I also did some hosteling down at the Charleston yard. That wasn't a real big yard, and the New York Central came in there too. They had a small roundhouse and a turntable and a coal, water and sand supply. The engine off the C&O's fast-flying Virginian passenger train would come in there to our terminal at Charleston. We'd turn it on the turntable and sand, water, and coal the engine and got it ready to go out the next morning. That engine was serviced by B&O Hostler in that B&O yard for its return trip. They had a distinct turn that worked the yard at Charleston and then went up to Falling Rock and Clendenin. Yeah, okay.
Now that hostling job, I held a hostling job at Charleston for a while, and worked in the roundhouse. That's where they done the mechanical work and turned the engines around and resupplied them for the trips back again. And the New York Central passenger engine come in there. It was a big engine, and I had to service it, put it on the. You know what a turntable is?
I think
the
so.
cable car San Francisco.
When they turn.
Yeah, you run
Yeah,
up
they
on
just
them,
like-
and then they balance, and,
Right,
and
right.
you turn them around and hit them back the other way.
Why do you need sand? He was talking about sand. For
Sand?
winter?
You heard a train one go. That's it's slipping on the rail. They've got sand feeders. They have a sandbox on that you fill up with sand, and then that sand runs down on the rail ahead of the wheels. And when the wheels start spinning, you turn the sand on, and that sand grits, and you go on.
It helped grip the track.
Yeah,
Oh, it was on the track.
and you had to coal. put coal on the engines. We had a coal thing where the hostler had to fill them with coal. And what was one
have
thing
no idea about that.
funny one night, I was there and it was cold. I mean, it was really cold. And I was in the office and by myself there because at night the hostlers are all by themselves. And here come one of the winos in. And he come in and just sat down in the chair and started talking. And I was getting a little bit edgy about him being there. So I said, look, bud, I said, you're not allowed to rough around in here. I said, that's all right. And I said, no. I said, now the B&O Bull's going to be around here in a minute, and he's going to take a hand.
Yeah, right,
And it's about due for him to come. So he talked for a while, and he said, well, I'll go on then. And he went out. Well, now the sand we was talking about, they had a box out there and had a big coal-burning stove in it. You had to keep it heated to keep that sand dry because you couldn't use the wet sand. So I went out to fire that stove up, and here he was. He had laid down on that warm sand and put some sacks or something over him. I just pulled the sacks off of him and opened the windows and door and just left him there, and that's the last I ever seen him.
Oh my gosh! You wonder what happened, huh? All right, Eric.
Let's see. Of course, you had to bid on those turns. Talking about the turntables, I guess. Yeah. Let's see. Of course, you had to bid on those turns, and there was an old head engineer by the name of Harry Dawson, who held that turn for years and years. I worked some of those 4500s out of Cowan to Grafton, leaving east out of the Cowan yard. That was a long and steep grade down to Centralia. I didn't work out of Cowan too long, but when I went up there, I stayed in the beanery.
What's a beanery?
That's where you stay. Cowan was way out in the British, not in town or anything. And they have a cafeteria.
Oh, is it like a whole house? It's not like a hut or anything.
The railroaders played a lot of poker there and that. And it was just, they had your bedrooms there where you just place to
So it's
stay
like a house,
when you're
basically,
working
yeah.
away from home.
Like a boarding house.
Well, more like an army barracks.
Uh-huh. How many people would stay there typically?
Sometimes 40, 50.
Wow, that's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
They have to cook food and everything, and have facilities
Oh, yeah.
for everybody. Wow.
They had good food.
Oh.
Some of those tunnels on the grade up to Frenchton could really get hot in the cab of a steam engine. Of course, when they ran through one of those tunnels, they held it down as much as they could. The helpers would push the head engines through the tunnel, more or less, and the head end wouldn't have to work the engine so hard. And then when the head end got out of the tunnel, they would more or less try to pull the helpers and train through the tunnel. But you still had to work the engines pretty good, and it still got awfully black and sooty in the cabs, and you had to take the steam hose and wash the cab down. Now they had tunnel masks you could wear, but most often we just took a piece of waste and put some ice in it to breathe through, and pulled our jacket up over our head and went through the tunnel. We never bothered with the tunnel mask too much because it was just too much trouble. Me and my dad were called out of Gasaway during the big snow of November 1950. My dad was the engineer, and I was firing for him, and we took an engine and snowplow out of Gasaway to Grafton because the yards at Grafton were all snowed in. We took the snowplow, and we were to stop in Buchanan to pick up another snowplow and go on to Grafton. We got to Buchanan, and that snowplow that we were to pick up was in the middle of the train, and it was so cold there. it was so cold, and there was so much snow and ice. It was frozen, and we couldn't even get the snowplow out of the train. So we had to go on to Grafton with the one snowplow from Gasaway. And we couldn't get in the yard when we got to Grafton. We sat on the hill at Berkeley Run Junction for several hours until we could get into the yard and went on the law, 16 hours of service law.
Now, do you know what the law is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You could work 12 hours. But if you worked over 12 hours, unless it was an act of God, they had to send a relief crew out to relieve you. But that snow was an act of God. So we actually worked 24 hours on that trip over there with that snowplow.
Jeez. But we stayed on duty and later took that plow into the yard, and they said that they had people in there with shovels trying to clear that yard so we could get that plow in there. I think it was in the sighting at Frenchton that the crew of a train later had to kill their engine there because they ran out of coal and water, and I think they had some cattle freeze to death on a cattle car.
Cattle car, yeah.
Wow. I think my dad taught me the most about firing a steam engine of anybody. He was furloughed during the Depression, and he worked at other places, but he always missed railroading. And finally, when he got the opportunity to go back, he did, and later retired there. But you learned something from all of them. Rounder Groves was a good engineer from Gasaway, and Benny Paxton was a passenger engineer. An engineer could make it awfully hard on a fireman if he didn't handle his injector just right. If you let that water get down and you're working the engine, then you open that injector up and put all that cold water into the boiler, you couldn't keep the steam pressure up. I can remember that gasoline-powered doodlebug they ran out of Charleston. I remember one time I was driving, and here come the doodlebug, and he started blowing his horn, but I didn't see him. Well, the road just followed the railroad out of Charleston, and man, when that horn started blowing, I started looking in my rearview mirror because I thought it was a semi-truck coming, and I was going to try to get out of its way. But there wasn't any semi-truck visible in my mirror, and then I saw that doodlebug and knew its horn was what I heard. One thing about working on the railroad, you either loved it or you hated it. Most of the people working on the railroad who worked there very long really liked the job. Railroading was part of their life. I love working on the steam engine, but I did not enjoy working on the diesels. I was always anxious to get to work, and I just loved working on those steam engines. I just like to hear them working hard and everything about them. That exhaust really sounded good when they were working hard. I was ready for my final exam for being an engineer when I left the railroad, and if I had stayed another year, I would have been promoted to engineer. But the diesels were coming, and I would have furloughed a lot. I just worked a few jobs out of there, Gasaway, on the diesels, and then I got furloughed. I don't remember that much about the diesels, but I think the first ones we got were Baldwin diesels. If there were 5 steam engines on a turn going out of Gasaway to Grafton, there would be 5 engineers and 5 firemen on that train. But when you put a set of diesels together, there was only 1 engineer and 1 fireman on them. And a lot of men who were furloughed never went back to the railroads because they went to other places to go to work.
Very good.
Oh, all right.
It was interesting.
That's a cool story to have.
And Eric, you might remember you went on a doodlebug.
Did I?
Remember when we went out in the boonies with Daddy and
That wasn't a doodlebug.
oh, wasn't it?
That was a mechanized hand car Doodlebug is
through
is,
the-
is like a
Oh.
streetcar, only it
Oh,
runs
okay.
only it runs on the railroad tracks.
Right.
And what's that there, Daddy?
That's
What a minute.
that's that letter he wrote.
Oh, he wrote you.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I don't even remember what it says now. And I never did know if he wrote that book. That's what
He did write a book about trains, but I don't think he wrote this particular book.
I'd
I'm
like
not
to-
sure.
Got a copy of that.
All right.
That was a wonderful.
Well, Paul,
Special
thank
gift.
you so much.
Oh, how nice.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's really special.